Hey everyone, and welcome to this deep dive.
Yeah.
We're going to be exploring some recent discoveries about Neanderthals. For a long time, people thought of them as kind of like just focused on survival.
Right.
But new research from this place called Prado Vargas Cave in Spain
Mm-hmm.
um,
Oh.
is really kind of flipping that idea on its head.
Yeah.
It's a site with a ton of archaeological history.
Yeah.
And one layer from about 40,000 to 55,000 years ago shows us that Neanderthals were definitely hanging out there.
Yeah.
And get this, researchers found 15 marine fossils in the same layer.
Yeah, what's so interesting is that these fossils don't look like they were used for tools or anything like that. They were collected.
Hold on, like seashells on a mantelpiece, you mean?
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, it might sound kind of strange, but the researchers think that these Neanderthals might have just liked the way the fossils looked.
That is wild. It makes you wonder what else they might have collected. So tell me more about these fossils. What kind of creatures were they from?
Well, they found a mix of different types of fossils. Mostly mollusks, like snails and clams and things like that.
Right.
But there's even a piece of an echinoderm, which is related to a starfish. And we're talking fossils from the Upper Cretaceous period. So that's a period from way before the Neanderthals were even around.
Wait a minute. So these fossils were already ancient when the Neanderthals found them.
Uh-huh.
So how did they even get into that cave in the first place?
That's a good question.
Like, I don't know, maybe they just kind of washed in somehow.
Well, the researchers thought of that too, but they're pretty sure that the Neanderthals actually brought them there. So, for one thing, the fossils were all in that one layer, right where the Neanderthals were living.
Okay.
And there's no sign that they were, washed in from somewhere else. Also, the layers of rock above the cave are actually younger than the fossils, so they couldn't have just fallen in from above.
Okay, so no prehistoric floods then.
Right.
So it really does sound like they went out of their way to collect them.
Yeah.
So I'm picturing them wandering around and spotting these interesting shapes and being like, I like that one.
Yeah, and that's where this discovery gets really interesting, right?
Yeah.
It means that they had to have a certain level of curiosity and an appreciation for these things that are beyond, just basic survival. It's really challenging those assumptions about, what Neanderthals were even capable of.
So if they weren't using them for tools, then why collect them? I have to admit, I'm a little stumped.
Well, you're not alone. Even the researchers are kind of just speculating at this point, but they have come up with some pretty interesting theories.
Okay, well, lay it on me. What are we thinking?
Well, one idea is that, just like you were saying, maybe they just liked the way they looked. They found them interesting or pretty. Just think about how we might pick up a really uniquely shaped rock or a colorful seashell at the beach. It's possible that Neanderthals were drawn to these fossils for pretty similar reasons.
Okay, so an early sense of aesthetics then.
Yeah.
Like Neanderthal interior design. I like it,
Yeah.
but what else could it be?
Well, here's where it gets even more interesting. So some of the fossils were actually found near the remains of young Neanderthals.
Wait, so little Neanderthal kids might have been collectors too. I'm suddenly having this picture of them showing off their new finds to each other.
It's definitely possible. And it really raises the question of were they attracted to these things for the same reasons that, kids today collect things? Were they just fascinated by them, or did these objects hold some kind of deeper meaning?
So we're talking about potential symbolic thinking, maybe even rituals.
Exactly. And it's not just about pretty things either. Another theory is that the Neanderthals might have used these fossils for social exchange. Maybe they traded them or they gave them as gifts.
Wow, that's like early bartering.
Yeah.
So were these fossils a way for Neanderthals to show off their status?
It's possible. If they were using these fossils in social interactions, it suggests that they had to have had established social structures and potentially even hierarchies.
This is really making me rethink what I thought I knew about Neanderthals. They're turning out to be a lot more complex than I imagined.
You're right. This discovery, along with others in recent years, is really forcing us to reconsider how we understand Neanderthals. It's like we're getting a glimpse into a world that's so much richer and more sophisticated than we previously thought.
All right, this is getting really good. But before we get too carried away, let's take a moment to just let that all sink in. We've uncovered some pretty mind-blowing ideas about Neanderthals and their potential collecting habits.
I think that's a great idea. Let's pause here and let our listeners absorb all this information.
We'll be right back to dive even deeper into this incredible discovery. All right, we're back, and I have to admit I'm still a little skeptical. Are we really sure these Neanderthals were intentionally collecting these fossils?
Yeah, I get that. Not everybody in the scientific community is totally convinced, and that's fine. Skepticism is part of science, right?
Right. So what are some of the counter arguments? Why are some researchers hesitant to just say, yeah, Neanderthals were collectors?
Well, some researchers say that just because we find fossils in a cave with Neanderthal remains, that doesn't automatically mean they were collecting them for a reason,
Hmm.
like aesthetics or social exchange. They're saying we need more evidence to be sure that the Neanderthals weren't just randomly picking up these fossils.
Fair enough. But there have to be other discoveries that support this idea of Neanderthals having more complex behaviors, right?
Oh, absolutely. The Prado Vargas discovery, it's just one piece of a really big puzzle.
Hmm.
In the last few decades, there's been a bunch of findings that are changing how we think about Neanderthals.
Like what?
Well, there's this cave in Gibraltar called Gorham's Cave, and archaeologists found all these abstract engravings there. They think they're at least 39,000 years old.
Wow, Neanderthal art.
Yeah,
That's a lot cooler than what I had in mind.
exactly. And it's not just engravings either. There are these other sites across Europe where Neanderthals were using pigments, like ochre.
Oh, wow.
So they were decorating themselves, their tools, maybe even their caves.
Okay, so we're talking creativity, self-expression, maybe even a desire to, like, beautify their surroundings. It's starting to sound like they were a lot like us.
Right. And that's what's so exciting about all of this. These discoveries are really blurring the lines between us and them. They're showing us that Neanderthals weren't these like simple primitive beings that we always imagine. They were capable of complex thought and behavior, maybe not that different from our own.
You know, it's interesting because even beyond Neanderthals, we're seeing collecting behavior in other ancient hominins. Like, remember that story about the, was it the Australopithecine cobble?
Ah, yes, that's a great example. So basically, they found this smooth, round stone in South Africa. It was in a cave where Australopithecus africanus lived. And get this, the stone, it naturally looks a lot like a human face.
Wait, are you saying that these early hominins, Australopithecus africanus, were collecting stones that looked like faces millions of years ago?
It's a theory. I mean, we can't know for sure what they were thinking, but it's possible they were drawn to the stone because it looked like a face.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
It kind of suggests that maybe this urge to collect, to be drawn to objects for reasons beyond, just their practical use, could be a deep part of our evolutionary history.
It's a really fascinating idea, and maybe, just maybe, this behavior isn't unique to humans or even hominins. Maybe if we look close enough, we could find something similar in other animals too.
Okay, my mind is officially blown. But let's get back to the Neanderthals at Prado Vargas. They were surrounded by fossils from the Upper Cretaceous period, right? Like their cave was built into those rock formations.
Exactly. They were living among rocks that formed during the late Cretaceous, a time when dinosaurs were still walking the earth.
Wow. But you said earlier that some of the fossils they collected were actually older than the rocks surrounding the cave.
Right.
So how is that possible?
That's where things get really interesting. Remember, the researchers found a mix of fossils, some that are common in the cave's rock formations, and others that are from an older formation.
Okay, so how did those older fossils end up in a cave surrounded by younger rocks?
Right. Did they wash in from somewhere else?
Yeah.
Well, you'd think you'd see evidence of that, right? In the cave sediments, like a mix of different types of rocks and dirt all jumbled together. But the researchers, they didn't find that. The sediment was mostly undisturbed, mostly clay and bits of limestone.
Okay, so no prehistoric flood then. So how did they get there?
Well, there are a few possibilities. Maybe the Neanderthals traveled to a different place where those older rocks were exposed. Remember, Neanderthals were nomadic.
Yeah.
They moved around a lot.
Right.
So maybe they went on a fossil hunting trip.
Okay, historic road trip. I love it.
Or another possibility is that the older fossils were moved closer to the cave naturally, like by erosion. Maybe a river carried them down from somewhere else.
Okay, so the Neanderthals might have stumbled upon them during their travels and decided to take them back home.
Exactly. But here's the real mystery. Even if those older fossils were just lying around, why did the Neanderthals choose those specific ones? Out of all the fossils, why those?
It's like a prehistoric whodunit.
Right.
We know they collected them, but the big question is why those specific fossils?
It's a question we're still trying to answer, but I think it's incredible that these fossils are still making us think and debate, all these years later.
It really makes you wonder what those Neanderthals saw in them. What stories were they telling?
That's a great point. We often think of fossils as just scientific specimens, but for these Neanderthals, they might have been so much more.
I'm ready to hear more. What are some of the theories about why those specific fossils might have been so appealing to the Neanderthals?
One idea is that maybe they were attracted to certain visual features. We talked about how humans are naturally drawn to aesthetically pleasing things, right?
Right.
So maybe these Neanderthals were drawn to, I don't know, the shapes, colors, or textures of these fossils.
So the way the light hit the surface of a shell, or maybe the patterns on a piece of coral.
Exactly. It's possible they saw beauty in these fossils in ways that we can't even
I
imagine.
really like that. That just makes our view of Neanderthals even more complex.
It does, right. And it makes us rethink what we think we know about how their brains worked and their capacity to appreciate things.
You know, it also makes me wonder if those fossils had a deeper meaning for them than just how they looked.
That's a great point. Remember, we talked about those fossils maybe being important socially.
Right, like status symbols or for rituals.
Exactly. Maybe certain types of fossils were more valuable than others, or maybe they were more symbolic. Like, we could imagine a system where a rare or beautiful fossil could elevate your status in a group, or maybe they were used like tokens of affection.
Like the Neanderthal version of a diamond ring.
Exactly. But what if the fossils had personal meaning to the individual that collected them? Maybe they were reminders of a place or an event or a connection to someone they cared about.
Oh, like how we might keep a seashell from a vacation when we were kids, or a ticket stub from a concert. You know, those objects, they hold memories and emotions. They connect us to our past.
Exactly. So who's to say that Neanderthals didn't have similar experiences and attachments to objects?
Yeah, it really makes them seem more human, doesn't it? It shows that they weren't just focused on survival. They had complex emotions and relationships.
I agree. I think that's one of the most important things about this discovery. It makes us think about our preconceived ideas about Neanderthals, and it helps us see them as these complex beings that experience the world in their own unique way.
So as we're wrapping up this deep dive, I'm just left with a sense of wonder and a new appreciation for all the mysteries of the past. We may never know for sure why those Neanderthals collected those fossils, but the fact that they did, it opens up so many possibilities about how their brains worked, their social structures, their emotional lives.
You said it perfectly, and I think the biggest thing is to just keep asking questions and keep exploring and keep challenging our assumptions about our ancestors. The more we learn, the more we realize how much we still don't know.
Well said. And on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive. But keep exploring the world of Neanderthals. There's still so much more to learn, and who knows what incredible discoveries are waiting for us in the future.
Happy exploring, everyone, and until next time, keep those minds curious.
Thanks for joining us. We'll see you on the next deep dive.
Okay, we're back. And I'm still thinking about those Neanderthals and how they chose those specific fossils. What do you think was going through their minds? What made them so special?
Yeah, it's a real mystery. We might never really know the answer, but that's part of what makes learning about the past so interesting. We get these little glimpses into the lives of these people from so long ago, and we have to use what we know to figure out the rest. Yeah, it's like we're trying to read a book where half the pages are ripped out. We've got the fossils, we've got the cave, but that why is still missing.
I know, right? But even without all the answers, we can still use our imaginations and what we know about people to look at all the different possibilities.
Okay, so let's do that then. If those Neanderthals were choosing their fossils so carefully, what could have drawn them to those specific ones?
Well, we talked about how humans are drawn to things because they're pretty, right? So maybe those Neanderthals were drawn to the shapes or colors or textures of those fossils.
So maybe it was how the light hit the surface of a shell or the patterns on a piece of coral?
Exactly. It's possible they saw beauty in those fossils that we just can't even imagine anymore.
I really like that idea. It really shows how complex Neanderthals probably were.
I know, right? It really challenges us to rethink what we thought we knew about how smart they were and their ability to appreciate things.
It also makes me think that maybe those fossils meant something more to them than just looking pretty.
Right. Remember how we talked about them maybe being important for their social lives?
Yeah, like as status symbols, or maybe even using them in some kind of ritual.
Exactly. Maybe some fossils were seen as more valuable or symbolic than others. We could imagine a situation where a rare or really beautiful fossil might have given someone a higher status in their group. Or maybe they were used like as gifts.
Like a Neanderthal diamond ring.
Yeah, exactly. But what if those fossils meant something more personal to the Neanderthal that collected it?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, maybe they were like little souvenirs to help them remember a place or something that happened, or even a connection to someone they cared about.
Oh, that makes sense. Like, we might keep a seashell from a vacation we took when we were kids or a ticket from a concert we went to. Those things help us remember and feel connected to our past.
Exactly. So who's to say that Neanderthals didn't have similar experiences?
It really makes you realize that they were a lot like us in many ways. They weren't just focused on survival. They had emotions and relationships just like we do.
I agree. I think that's one of the most important things we can take away from all of this. It helps us to see Neanderthals as these complex beings who had their own way of experiencing the world.
So as we finish up this deep dive, I'm just left with a sense of wonder. Like, wow. And a new appreciation for all the mysteries that are still out there about the past. We may never know for sure why those Neanderthals collected those fossils, but the fact that they did, it makes us think about all sorts of things, like how their minds worked, how they interacted with each other, what their emotional lives were like.
You put it perfectly. And I think the most important thing is to keep asking questions and keep exploring and keep challenging our assumptions about our ancestors. The more we learn, the more we realize how much is still out there to discover.
Well said. And with that, I think we've come to the end of our deep dive. But keep exploring the world of Neanderthals, everyone. There's still so much more to learn, and who knows what amazing discoveries are waiting for us out there.
Have fun exploring, everyone, and until next time, stay curious.
Thanks for joining us on this amazing journey. We'll see you on our next deep dive.